One.
Doing good.
Hope
Pretty
you are.
good, pretty good.
Good. Hope everyone had a pretty good holiday on Monday. Didn't do a whole lot of schoolwork, I assume. I hope. Right?
Exactly.
Yep. All right, so let's dive back in and let's talk a little bit more around what we're going to talk about this week and then kind of cover a little bit about last week to kind of recap. So we've talked over the past several weeks or the past several lectures. We've talked about using the CentOS machine or a Linux machine running Ansible to connect to either a Linux host, whether it's Ubuntu or CentOS, or to a Windows machine, whether it's Windows Server or Windows Desktop. We've been using Ubuntu and Windows Desktop, or I'm sorry, Windows Server as our two targets. However, those aren't the only ones that you can use. We've even gone through and set up users on our Linux machine. We have configured and set up applications. We've set up different we set up applications and websites. Now we're going to kind of go a little deeper. We've worked a little bit with the Linux side, building users and groups and adding those users to groups. Now we're going to go a step farther. So this week we're going to continue looking at setting up remote machines, and we're going to dive in and look at configuring Windows servers. We're going to look at access groups and user groups. We're going to talk through access control lists in Windows Server, and then we're going to round out our topics with configuring server roles for IIS, or the Windows equivalent to Apache. All right, so again, for this week, we're going to look at configuring firewalls on the Windows machine, turning those on and off, and creating users and groups. So again, at the end of the week or the end of this lecture, you should be able to create and manage users and groups using Ansible, learn how to configure the firewall to turn it on and off, and use Ansible to provision and deprovision some common tasks that you would see on a regular basis, like turning a firewall on and off as needed. So again, for the first part of our guided practices, we're going to create a Windows script or a Windows playbook that will allow us to modify the firewall. We will set up our Ansible host to ensure that we can connect using the WinVars section. And then we will build out our Windows firewall off script, which will disable the firewall for the domain, the public, and the private profiles. If you have custom profiles, you can add those as well. And it will tag the event as disable firewall. Once successful, you should be able, or we will be able to go to our Windows firewall or our Windows server and be able to see that it was turned off. We're also going to enable the firewall. Notice there's two small differences. We say enabled instead of disabled, and we tag it differently with enabled versus disabled. Slightly different, but it just reverses the flags. The second part that we're going to work with is users and groups. We're going to create 2 new users in the development group. The users are going to be called user 1 and 2, and we're going to assign them the folder structure of C development. We're going to automatically allow them to be added to the development and the users groups. We're going to use a loop, just like we have previously in our shell environment, to loop through the users and create those. We can then go in and ensure that each one of those users was created and that it is added to the correct groups. Once we have our groups created and our users added to those, we want to start looking at locking things down using Microsoft's or managing access control lists on our Windows server to only allow certain individuals to get to those directories. So we only want to manage the development directory or folder and allow full control for anyone in the development group. And so we'll set our Windows access control file to create the development folder, to assign full control to the development users or groups, and then allow inheritance on that group. Now, there's one thing I want you to take note of is when we create the default folder, if you rerun this stack multiple times, you will probably need to comment out that section if it was successful, or else you'll need to delete that directory first before you're rerunning your stack or your script. Once it's successful, we can then go in and validate that the development users or groups has the ability to have full control over the development folder. And then finally, we will go through and start looking at creating IIS services or a web server for Windows. We're going to check to see if it's present first. And if it is present, which it should be in a Windows environment, we're going to set up SSH, where instead of using our password to remote in, we're going to start using SSH to allow us to connect into our Windows environment. So we'll stop our service. Make sure that it does, in fact, go down and that we can no longer access it. We will modify the iis.html file. We'll then set up our SSH credentials to do a passwordless configuration. And we'll start the website and move the file over. If all is successful, we should see our new test file that's broadcasted. Any questions so far?
No.
All right, so let's go ahead and shift over. I'm going to go ahead and be in my CentOS machine as soon as it loads. All right, and the first thing we're going to look at is our first guided practice, which is guided practice 4.3. That guided practice is going to be configuring a Windows server using our Ansible playbooks. So I'll go ahead and load this really fast. And so for the outcome of this exercise, one of Ansible's strengths is the ability to facilitate the configuration of Linux as well as Windows changes on your network with ease. And so we're going to look at configuring our Windows environment so that we can do just that. So we're going to first look at our host file. If you haven't opened your host file in a while, it's either going to be under hosts in VS Code, or let's say you're not going to use VS Code. Let's say you want to use your terminal. That's perfectly fine as well. So if you're in your terminal, you would navigate to the etc Ansible folder, and you're going to see a file called hosts. I'm going to cat that file, and we should have several different groups in here. We have complex 1, complex 4, we have our DB server, web server, and then we have our Windows server. I want to make sure that that is available. So I'll go ahead and clear my screen. Before I do that, we do want to take a quick screenshot of this to ensure that it is set up. So I'll go ahead and take that screenshot. Then I will navigate back to my home directory, and I'll go into my playbooks. We'll go into week 4. And the first one we're going to work with, you can either use Vim, VI, Nano, or you can use VS Code, whichever one you choose, is going to be Win FW off. So let me clear that screen. And so our first one is going to be host Windows. Our task is going to just have one task, and it's going to disable the firewall for the domain public and private profiles, just like you saw earlier. We're going to use the community Windows firewall plugin or binary to disable or enable the firewalls on the Windows machine. We're going to set the state to disabled. We're going to choose the profiles that we want to disable, and then we want to tag that. I'll go ahead and do a screenshot of this as well, so you'll have that. And I will pause here because I don't want to go too fast.
Hey, Professor,
Yes, sir.
should we have all those configurations in week 4 similar to you, or?
No, I pre-built these.
Oh, okay, okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I pre-built them about an hour ago and loaded those. Actually, let me see if I can get to the OneDrive. I might can share those. All right, I just posted a link in chat. See if you can access those.
I'm trying to pull it up right now. It looks like yes. But they're read only. I guess you
Yeah,
could,
they should be read only.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so you should be able to go into Firefox on that machine and me shorten that URL. You should be able to paste that URL or write that URL out in here. So short URL. And then sign in, and you should be able to see those files. If not, you're more than welcome to type these out.
Hey, Professor, when I save my thing, it says asking me if, wow, do you want to install the recommended Rainbow CSV extension from MidChat? I don't even know.
Let's see.
I don't even know what that is, but
Hold on. Let me pop in.
It's asked me that before too. I've just ignored it.
Oh, you can say yes if you want. All that's going to do is for your users.csv file you have open, it makes it look a little prettier. You can close that out now. There you go.
Thank you.
All right, so once we have our firewall created or our auth script created, we can then run the playbook. Syntax check. All right, and once we have done that, we can run this. And once that is finished, we'll go ahead and take a screenshot of that. And then we can navigate into our Windows machine. And in the Windows machine, we can go down to Start and to Firewalls. And it should be disabled entirely. Once that is disabled, we want to go back to our CentOS machine. And then we want to run the on script. Like I mentioned earlier, the only differences here is enable firewall for enabled and enable the firewall itself. And honestly, all you really have to do is copy the off script to on and then change those few things. And then we will run that script. And once that has completed, I'll go ahead and take that screenshot. And then if we go over and look at our Windows machine, you'll notice that the firewalls are turned back on. And I'll take another screenshot of those. All right, so before we wrap up our guided practice for 4.3, what would be a reason that you would want to create these two files, the enable and disable script, and what could be some uses for those?
Automation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, troubleshooting like user access, user permissions.
Yep, so automation, user permissions. Let's say you are modifying trying to think it through. Let's say you're modifying a website or the folders on that website. And in order to do so, you have to be able to connect using FTP instead of SFTP, or you have to do some other protocol connection. By running the off on that firewall, it would basically disable the checks, which may allow you to come through. So it's, and then once you're finished, you can enable it again. So it's a way to systematically or programmatically enable and disable the firewall before you do any of your, like Sean mentioned, automation. All right, any questions on that before we move on to 4.4?
No, no questions.
All right, so I will go ahead and close these. And I will share this screen again so you'll see the Linux machine. All right, so we completed 4.3. Now we're moving into 4.4, which is adding Windows users and groups to a server using Ansible. And so for this example, we're going to look at our host file again to validate that it is still correct. Of course, we haven't changed it, so we're still going to validate that it's correct. And then we're going to write our first playbook called Win Users Groups, so Windows Users and Groups. And this particular file is going to create a domain group called development. It's going to create 2 domain users called user 1 and 2 and assign their passwords. And then we'll go into our Windows environment and validate that those are in fact available. So our first task is the win users and groups. We're going to create, what did I miss? All right, I have some spacing issues, so give me 1 second. I can re-update that file so you all won't have to. All right, that one's been updated. And so again, we are using the Windows host. We're creating a group named developments. We're adding that to domain local. And we're creating 2 users called user 1 and user 2.
Professor, how did you actually load up that on there without typing it all in?
You mean all of this here?
Yeah.
I
I know you
pre-built.
had done it, but you did that file, you put that file in the chat. How did you are you able to load it up on here, or you actually have to type everything?
So I loaded that to my OneDrive and I went to OneDrive in Firefox
Through there.
and then I downloaded it from there.
Okay.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. It was just an easier way to write it out as opposed to having to write it out in a live environment. All right, so let's do a syntax check. Oh, and I've got some issues. Playbook when users syntax check. So let me do that again. All right, so we are creating our domain group and we're adding 2 users to that. One thing I want you to bear in mind here is the update password and password never expires. These are 2 flags that we're setting at that Microsoft AD level to set the group called development and domain users so the users are able to log in. And we're saying create the password when the user is created and set it to never expire. It's no different than if you were to go into the front end or using PowerShell and create the user on the actual Windows machine. Is feeding the same command structure to PowerShell or to the Ansible playbook to do the creation. All right, so we'll go ahead and hit enter. And we'll wait a few moments and let that finish. What did I have an issue with? Line number 9, column 5. Okay. Try that one more time. All right, so let me make that change and upload that again so you'll have it. Take a screenshot that it was built. And you'll notice we have user 1 and 2 with password 1 and 2. The task for creating the group was successful, and the 2 tasks for creating the users was successful. So if we move over to our Windows environment, we can go to Tools, to Active Directory Users and Computers. Under Users, you should see the 2 new users. And if I select one of those and say member of, you should see they're attached to the development and the users groups. Do the same thing for number 2. All right, I'll take a screenshot of that. All right, so by running this playbook, we have created 3 objects. The first, again, is the domain group. The second is the user 1, and the third is the user 2. So now, if I were to go here, I should be able to sign out. And it may not let me. I may be missing the remote group. We'll see. Yep. Yep. And that's fine. So it doesn't have the ability to log in directly just yet. All right, any questions on 4.4? All right, so we've been going, go ahead. All right, so we've been going for about an hour or so. Let's take a 10-minute break and stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee. When we get back at 6:35, we will continue on with our last 2 guided practices, which is 4.5 and 4.6, where we will build out our development folder and we will add controls around that and then set up a IIS server. All right, so be back in about 10 minutes.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, is everyone back?
Yes.
Yes. Here.
All
Present.
right, awesome. Let's go ahead and dive back in. All right, so we've worked with users and groups, and we've turned the firewall on and off. Now we want to work a little bit more with access control lists. And so we're going to create a file to start with called win_acl. This is going to create a folder on the Windows environment under the root of C called development. We're going to apply a full control access list to that folder only for the users in the development group. And we're going to then allow for, so we're going to remove inheritance from that folder. So I'll pull that one up. And so we are creating that folder, building the access list, and then removing inheritance. You'll notice in this section here, we're checking to make sure that the folder that we just created is there and that we can assign rights to it. And then we are setting the inheritance to absent. And then we're reorganizing. And I will take a screenshot of this once I do a syntax check. ACL syntax check. I'll pause it there in case you're typing it out. I don't want to go too far, too fast. All right, when you've got it completed and checked, if you would raise your hand or do a thumbs up in chat.
Almost there.
All right, so we'll go ahead and if you've already run your syntax check, we will remove the check and we'll run our playbook. All right, and if it was successful, we can take a screenshot of that. And then we'll roll over to our Windows machine. And if you go into, I'll navigate to it again. We'll go to the folder. We'll go to this PC, to the C drive. And you'll notice we have a development folder that wasn't there earlier. You can right click on that and go to properties. And under properties, click on the security tab and then choose development. You'll notice that that user or that group has full control. And we'll take a screenshot of that as well. Any questions on that guided practice?
Yeah, it might not be that important, but I got one.
Okay.
Is there a particular reason, like on Windows, it's permissions, but when we list it in that file, it's rights. Is there a particular reason for that? Or is it just different terminologies?
It's just different terminologies.
Gotcha.
But that is a good point.
Good way to confuse folks.
Yeah, well, it's also a good way to confuse people when you're writing a YAML file in a Linux environment to make a change in a Windows file structure. It's kind of dicey. All right, so let me switch back over. All right, so we have looked at building out access controls, users and groups. We have looked at configuring all of that in a Windows environment. So now let's shift into something a little bit more complex, which is configuring a server for IIS. If you're unfamiliar with IIS, it's just a different way to serve a .NET framework. I'll show this to you really fast. We can go to 192.192.168.1.2. And if it's already running, which it is, we can see it's running. Sorry, my machine went haywire. You should get the Internet Information Services landing page. So this is the page that we want to change. We want to modify that. And so we can close that out. And we're going to make a change to our Ansible host file. Up to this point, we haven't made a change to it, but we're going to make one for this one. Instead of calling it Windows or Win, we're going to make the change and we're going to call it IIS server. And IIS server. So you could either make the change or you can copy it. Either one works. I went ahead and made a change to the current environment. And so now I can go to File, Save, and then retry as sudo. And now my file is saved. To validate that, Ansible host. All right, we have our first beginning part all the way down to IIS. All right, so now let's do a ping test to see if we can hit that new host name. Because we've changed it from Win to IIS server, let's validate that it does in fact come back. And it did. So we'll take a screenshot of this to ensure that we show that it is working. Now I'm going to shift this up a little bit. I'm going to add Win instead of IIS server. This is going to come back and say it doesn't know what to do. That's because I modified it instead of copying it. All right, so our next task is creating an IIS instance or install the IIS server role. We're really just validating that it is present. So we'll call it iis.yaml. Syntax check. And once it's built, we can run this. But we've already validated that it's working because we were able to pull up the IIS screen. So we'll take a screenshot of that as well to show that it is working. We can also do a curl command. Or I can shift this and grep for believe that's right. Yep. So we got a 200. Okay. All right, so we know that it does in fact come back successfully. So now let's go ahead and configure our SSH passwordless public key in our Windows machine. So I'll shift over to our Windows machine. All right, so in the Windows machine, under the Server Manager dashboard, I'll go to Tools, into Active Directory Users and Computers. Under our users, we're going to right-click and go to New and User. We're going to say our first name, our last name, and then our user ID is going to be the same one that we would use to log in with. We're going to say next. We're going to set a password as password 1. For this one, I'm going to say password never expires. And say next and finish. All right, and so once that has been created, we can pop back over to our Linux machine. Now that we've created our user, let's go ahead and do an SSH connection using that same user. I'll pull it up here. We'll do SSH. At 1.2, and it should prompt you for a fingerprint. You'll say yes, and then for the password. And once successful, we are in our Windows machine. So I'm going to exit out of that. cleared the screen. And so now I want to ensure that I do have a public key and a private key, which are these two right here. So we want to do an SFTP for the user. So S McLean at 192.168.1.2. So this is going to, instead of using SSH, it's going to use secure FTP, which is the file transfer protocol. We're going to be moving or copying a file from one server to another. You'll notice that my prompt changed. And we'll do a dir to see where we are. I'm going to make a directory called .ssh and navigate into that folder. And then we're going to do a put for the home directory .ssh idrsa pub authorized keys. All right, and if it is successful, you should see 100%, and the file should have moved over. So we can do a dir and see that the file is there. So let's take a screenshot of this. And then we can type in exit or buy. Let's clear that screen again. And we'll get back into an SSH terminal. When I do SSH this time, it should not prompt me for the password. So this works extremely well for a regular user. However, if you are an admin user in Windows, it is going to prompt you every time. So let's add our user to the admin group. So let me share that screen. So we have our users. We will go to user, expand that user, and go to properties or add to a group. And we're going to say add administrator. Well, and I hit enter. And so now it's a part of the administrators group. And so now, if I shift back over to my Linux machine, and I try to do an SSH session again, I'm immediately prompted with a password. That's because an administrator has to be authenticated. So by default, it's going to prompt you for that user password. So let's switch back over. We're going to do a lot of switching here. Let's switch back over to our Windows environment. And close that out. We're going to open a folder called C Program Data SSH. And the file we want to open is SSHD. We're going to say open with Notepad and say OK. And we will scroll all the way to the very bottom. This is the file that's needed in order to get SSH working for your machine. So when we connect into the Windows machine using SSH, this is what's allowing us to get in and actually work with those files. So we're going to scroll to the very end of the file, and you'll notice the line match group administrators, authorized key file, program data, SSH, administrators authorized keys. So these two lines tell the OpenSSH protocol that the keys for that user from the administrators group are going to be placed in a different location than they have been placed before. So there's multiple ways that we can sort of deal with it. But we'll go ahead and comment these two places out for now. So we'll just go here and add a £sign in the beginning. And we'll save that. So I'll go to File and Save. And then we will go to Task Manager. So I'll right click and go to Task Manager, over to Services, and I find SSHD, and I restart it. By doing that, by going to the SSHD and modifying the group information under Tasks, going to Services, and restarting that service, if we flip back over to our Linux environment, if I were to do an SSH connection again with those lines commented out, it utilizes the same credentials and the same access key that we had previously. So it's a way to allow for a administrator to log in using the exact same key structure that they had previously. All right, so now that we've built our user to allow us to log in, I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to clear my screen. And I'm going to cat a file called website stopped. we're going to be creating this file, but before we create this file, we want to run a command. And so that command is going to be Ansible Galaxy Collections. And so the Ansible Galaxy is a free website or a sort of a command line tool that we're going to use that allows us to find and download any sort of shared content. Sort of like a public GitHub repo. So let's do a clear. We're going to do Ansible Galaxy Collection install community dot Windows and hit enter. It should say that it's already installed. All right. Francis, you said you had an issue.
Yes, sir. I can't find the program data file on the Windows box.
Okay, give me 1 sec. If you don't mind, I'll pop into yours.
Okay.
You said on the Windows box. Oh,
Yes, sir.
it's hidden, so you're gonna have to go up here and type in program data.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep. So since that has already been created, we can go to our IIS stopped script. So we're going to create two of these. We're going to create a stop and a started. And so our stopped one is going to stop our Windows server or our Windows IIS instance. And our started is going to start it. So I'll do a syntax check on this one. Syntax check. And I'll pause here for a moment. All right, so we can go back to our IIS instance. And we see that it is still running. So let's go ahead and run this. I will take a screenshot of this as well. And then we'll go back over to our activities and hit refresh. And this should be completely down. All right, and it's going to take it a little bit to time out on us. So while we're waiting on that one, there's another file that we need to create, and this one is called iis.html. And so this file will be what we modify and copy over. And it's just going to say IIS website test. This is my IIS website. I'll take a screenshot of this one as well. And so we're going to SFTP this file over to the correct directory. And so we'll log in as SFTP. And we're going to put that file into the inet pub root index.html file. And so once you've copied that over, you can exit out of your FTP session. And we can then open our final file, which is our start script. Syntax check. And I mistyped these two. It should have been started and start. Of course, that doesn't change the syntax. And then we'll run this. And hit try again. And you should see it changed. Take a screenshot of that as well. And so we have stopped our firewall. We've started a firewall with different profiles. We have made sure that IIS was installed. We've configured a file. We've copied that file over, and we've bounced our web server. We've also added users and groups to Windows, added and changed access control lists, and set up SSH so it's no longer requiring a password. So in theory, if I go back to my Ansible host file, this section right here is technically no longer needed because we're using SSH. Any questions on kind of what we've covered so far? Okay, so that's really what I wanted to cover for the evening, is to go through each one of the guided practices. For this week, you're going to have all of the guided practices that need to be submitted, along with the crossword puzzle and the performance assessment. I can tell you that the performance assessment for this week mimics very heavily what I just talked through. Just like in previous examples, it mimics it almost verbatim. You're going to create 2 users with a new group, and then you're going to change an access control list. Any questions so far?
No, none so far.
All right. Well, that is really what I wanted to cover for the evening. What we can do now is, if you want to finish up your guided practices, I'm going to stop the recording so that it finishes and I can upload that for you. I'm going to be around for a while. If you want to talk through anything, we can definitely do that. If you want to head out, you're more than welcome to do so. That's up to you. But I will be here probably till around 9:30 or 10 if you have any issues or questions. Anthony, you got a question?
Oh, yes. I was just wondering if you don't mind helping me through my homework with that issue I posted about earlier.
1 second. You pasted it in which chat? Did I miss it?
It was on the general chat. This one.
Oh, I see it. 2.5.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yep. So you're still logged in?
Oh, yeah, I'm logging in right now on the pod. I'm logging into the CentOS right now.
Okay. Let me go ahead. I'm going to stop the recording for everyone. And if you have any questions, just let me know. We'll work through them. So let me stop sharing. Stop the recording.